Hey everybody, Sheridan Ganger here with HelpShift. I am joined by Chris Tabasa, Director of Customer Operations at GREE. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I just wanted to provide a little context to our audience here who signed up for the webinar. This is our second series in our webinar series that we've launched at the beginning of the year. The first series was around our roadshow to GDC, which led up to what we called our More Summit that was hosted on March 4th at the St. Regis, where Chris was a panelist on one of our panels. The More Summit was really around user engagement and retention, two topics that aren't necessarily covered at GDC, but are huge when talking about mobile development and scaling your mobile apps and your mobile games. So this series, which will consist of 6 webinars, is really about carrying on that conversation that we started back in March. We really don't want to lose the momentum, and there's been a lot of discussion around these topics, around scaling your support organization, growing your community, and really focus on that user engagement and retention. So Chris, we're so happy that you could be our first participant in this webinar series. And before I turn it over to you to give a little bit of background on who you are and kind of what you're going to talk about today, I just want to let everybody know that this is being recorded. So if you miss it, or if you have a colleague that definitely wanted to hear Chris and gather his insights, we'll be posting it to our blog. And we also encourage people to join us using hashtag #AskHelpShift on Twitter. We have our team here working in the background, so monitoring the questions and comments. So definitely collaborate with us on this conversation. So Chris, tell the audience a little bit about who you are, kind of a little bit about your background that'll help shape the conversation.
Okay, well, thanks again for having me. So at this time, I'm actually with a company called GREE International. It's a free-to-play mobile game social provider. But I'll start a little bit back with about 5 years ago. I was actually with AT&T, and with AT&T, I was working within the customer support organization for a B2B client space, and it was actually a group that was actually evolving over time. So even in the B2B space, I actually spent some time helping form that organization and how to actually build relationships in a B2B space for kind of implementing contracts. I did that for a few years, and after that, I went to a smaller company, about 20 people, which was called Orbit Baby.
Orbit Baby,
which was a consumer goods company that provided high-end baby seats, strollers, and car seats for children. And it's pretty famous, and a lot of the celebrities actually are very familiar with it. And the Kardashians actually use it.
Oh, there you go, KK.
A few other stars too as well. But the experience I took away from there was high quality. So then I moved from a high quality environment to a high production environment. So that was when I went to GREE back in May of 2012. And
so your anniversary is coming up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it'll be 3 years this coming May.
Great.
And this has been a great experience. The company is a great company to work for. I work for a fabulous team, very smart and very fast moving. But we have to be fast moving because our player base is actually, our users, our customers are actually a very dynamic group of folks. So what I do there is actually, so I'm thinking back to the job description when I first applied, and it actually had said define and set up the strategy and the vision of the customer support organization.
Very high level.
Yeah.
Very high level.
Yeah. And help build out that infrastructure. So that was actually, and that was the one thing that I actually remember. And if I think back from where we were then and to where we're at now, it's completely different organization. I think when I first started, we had 4 people.
Wow. And what are you up to now?
So our entire organization is a few dozen, about 40 or so. We went from 4 people with 1 product, a few hundred tickets a day, to now thousands of tickets a day, multinational, multi-language organization, and dozens of products. So we've grown significantly since 2012.
Great. And thanks so much for giving that background. It definitely helps shape the topic today, which is around 3 key ways to scalable engagement. So Chris is definitely one of the thought leaders on this topic. So we're definitely going to be able to provide our audience not only those 3 solid key takeaways, but everything kind of in between. So let's kick it off. You started talking about growth. Yep. How did you go from 4 people to 40? Kind of what were the hiccups that you ran into, and how did you really manage scaling that quickly? I mean, 3 years really isn't that long of a time. That's
not,
quite a significant amount of growth. So especially to our audience that is kind of in that position, kind of maybe that fresh kind of indie place, how should they be thinking about and really grasping growth?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, first thing is we planned for steady growth. We planned to actually we knew what our trajectory was in terms of our number of products, and we actually had a pretty good plan. And then, I focused on 3 different areas when I think about scaling a group. And it's kind of broad in general, but it's, focused on your people, both internal and externally. And then the next one is process and procedures. So if you want to set a good foundation to actually grow on and actually build upon, you want to have good process and procedures in place. And then your tools. It would be a good final third kind of cornerstone for your group, which is basically, are you bringing in the right tools? Are you buying them to bring in to help support the group, or are you actually building them internally? And those are questions that we've constantly asked ourselves to make sure that we stay efficient too as well.
Great. So people, procedure, operations, and tools.
Yeah, absolutely.
Three great takeaways there. So catching up and managing the influx of players or mobile app customers is a big piece of that puzzle. So how do you maintain kind of that level of intimacy with your players as you go from, a very small monthly active user base to a very high monthly active user base?
Now, first, I'll probably start off by saying that, customer support organizations, that when companies first start off, they get a product, then all of a sudden they launch their product, and then they start getting inquiries from players, and customer support is often kind of an afterthought. And then maybe they pull somebody who has a little bit of extra time on the team and say, hey, can you answer these questions? Maybe it's a receptionist, and maybe it's a QA person. I like to say that, if you want to have a good customer experience, plan for it. Right? Hire people, bring on people who are actually going to help build that customer experience. So in our particular case, when we started actually bringing on people, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we planned for steady growth. But back in 2012 was a very kind of hot market for the free-to-play mobile space, and we came through a lot of good successes. But I remember there was one date, which was in January 17th, 2013. We launched a new feature, and it seemed like overnight, which almost quite literally, it was overnight, our products just took off.
Wow.
And so while we were planning for steady growth,
you went.
Yeah. Okay. So all of a sudden we were kind of behind the curve. So we had to react pretty quickly. And that reaction really tested the capabilities of our team.
What were kind of the lessons learned there?
So there were plenty. So to frame this, we actually had probably about 4 times growth in terms of ticket volume.
Growth
within that first week. So, and obviously you don't really plan, right? Because if you are night, absolutely.
You can conquer it, but overnight,
exactly,
it's a different problem.
Otherwise, you'd be wasting way too much money on if you plan for that. And so a couple and one, we actually had to pull the team together really quickly. And it was a time of a little bit of stress.
Of course, I mean, it's when things move that fast, of course they're going to be stressful. So it's about going back to your first point, having that solid team.
And it tests the strengths of your team. You actually begin to really understand, how strong your team is, where your weaknesses are, where you need to fix them. So within the support organization, we were actually able to, really step up and take on that growth. What was even more powerful was our partnership with the other organizations. So partnership with your product team, with your design team, your QA team, that actually makes a big difference on setting a good foundation because you need to be nimble and that communication has to happen pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
So we started building relationships with the different groups to actually help grow that.
That speaks a lot to the health of an organization as well. It's really about being transparent with, as you mentioned, all of those different business units within your larger organization. It's really, you have to have that marriage for a successful product and a successful organization. Sorry for my hiccup there. Successful. So that's a great kind of key takeaway for everybody on the call today, is that you need to be transparent in what's going on. And actually that helps with product growth and iterations and new features. So great point there. And that kind of leads me into understanding kind of who is the modern player these days? Who is the modern mobile app user? And how do customer organizations like your team kind of have to understand that to really grow and scale?
Right. So the interesting thing about modern customers is that they're really intelligent, right? They know that they have access to information, and more importantly, or to their advantage, they know how to find that information.
Exactly.
Now, if you bring that into the mobile space, all of a sudden time and space actually gets even smaller, and they're actually able to react a lot faster and actually pull that information together a lot faster. We have to be prepared for a very dynamic, very highly informed group, which we have to step up for. So we actually have to be just as informed. We have to know where they're getting their sources of information, and we have to react just as fast. So
absolutely,
it's really important for us to actually be able to, one, meet the expectations of our customers, the modern customer, but also help lead them, right? Make sure that we're actually, it's always a game to actually make sure you're one step ahead of them so that you don't fall too far behind them, right? So if you know that they're going to look for that information, where do you put it to make sure that they actually have that access to the information that you want them to have? Great
insight. I actually just learned a lot there too. So thank you for the full information, Chris. Each player is an individual investment, right? Each player is a person. They have their own personality, they have their own wants, their own needs. So let's shift that to community part of the support organization, is building out that engaged, collaborative community. So how do you look at your individual players as members of that larger community, and how are you able to serve them on that one-to-one intimate level?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can actually look at that. So when I think about community, I think about there's your kind of traditional format where you have forums as a vehicle, Facebook, social media, Facebook, Twitter. Even myself actually think that support, your tickets, the one-on-one communications is actually a form of community too as well.
I completely agree.
And that's an untapped area for like data mining. You can actually get a lot of information from interacting with your players. But if you take that complete ecosystem of communications between you and the player, each individual adds value to that, right? And so customers actually slice up their companies slice up their customers in different ways. So in the free-to-play space, they break it out into like users who don't pay and users who do pay, right? And maybe there's different tiers within that, or maybe sometimes they look at their tenure within the company or within the product, or how much activity they actually provide to the product or within the community. The important thing to know is that every single one of those actually add value to your overall ecosystem.
Every single one of those adds value to your ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the question you want to ask yourself is, how do you capture that information, right? And so in the forums, you actually deliver information. I call that the one-to-many method of actually communicating. And then you identify the people who are your key players. You identify people who are actually more active that you can get more information from. And then you give them a platform to actually talk with more players. And then you actually use them also to actually synthesize information. So, and you take that and actually bring that back to your teams as well.
How do you encourage players to give you feedback or kind of converse with you, whether it's via a ticket or social community? That's one of the things I know that when I was walking the floor at the More Summit, I could hear kind of people rumbling like, how do you get a player that is so engaged in a game to actually stop and talk to you, or post something on Twitter, post something on Facebook, or collaborate on something that you guys have posted to your branded channel? How do you get people to actually take that next step?
Yeah, so there's well, one, you actually have to invite them to, right? So that's the first
first step, invite.
Yeah, and then create that space. Right. So when I say create that space to actually interact with the community, there's kind of two kind of camps of how you address your community, right? So if your demographic is highly social on Facebook, or they communicate on Facebook, maybe that's a community that you don't necessarily want to take them out of Facebook. You actually want to go there. That way that the information is actually constantly moving.
Keep them in the community where they're feeling comfortable and where they're active.
Exactly, exactly. And then begin to talk to them there. Right? If you feel like for business reasons that it's actually better to actually bring them within your own ecosystem, and so that way you can actually deliver them the information the way that you want to, and then they're delivered the way that you want to. Maybe you create a forum space or some other social a medium where they can actually come to and you bring them to and interact with them there.
Great insight. So what I've just learned there is definitely meet your player, meet your mobile customer in the environment where they are and where they're active, right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel or pull them out of the space that they're already in, or you're not going to see that engagement. Right. So let's talk about kind of go back to growth. So when companies, and for example, when you guys hit that 4 times growth in overnight, customer support organizations automatically think, oh my God, I need more agents. Oh my gosh, I need more people. And then your chief revenue officer is going to go, uh-oh, that's going to be more cost to my organization.
Right.
How can we squash that kind of concern and really say it's not just about adding more agents, but it's actually look at the tools you have in place, right? How do you offer self-service? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's a whole 3 hour conversation.
And I know we only have 30 minutes, so the quick answer in a nutshell is,
well, so I actually like to look at the density of your communication, right, or your opportunities or contact. I think some people will actually look at it and then they'll say, you know what, our MAU, our monthly active user base, is actually growing. So because that's growing, then we need to hire more people. It's kind of a blunt way to look at it. It's not very, I mean, it might work for some businesses, but what you really want to look at is how the velocity of communication, how dense is it? So if you're looking at MAUs, do they contact the company or interact with the product once a month, twice a month, 3 times a month, or do they do it daily? So that volume of opportunities to contact actually changes quite frequently. So we look at a smaller period of time, which is, and a lot of mobile companies do, which is daily active users. Right? But we even break it down to the volume per hour. Where
granular.
So it's valuable because then you can actually scale your day, right? So if I actually looked at my daily volume per day, I can actually take so I know exactly where it peaks out. So it's kind of a bell curve, right from 3 to 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time is when it actually starts to bell out. Right? And I could take that and almost every single day looks exactly the same curve. So I plan around that. So we plan that this is the most dense period of the day, and then we make sure that we staff accordingly too as well. And let's say, for example, that we know that there's a cycle of events coming up. And during those events, it actually probably shifts that curve. So let's just say, for example, the event starts at 6. That's just for kind of to broaden it. Maybe it's a sale, and the sale starts at 6. That's going to actually create more opportunities to interact with your product. So we will plan around that event too as well. So that way we can, as those opportunities grow and as the interactions with your company actually are expected to grow during that period of time, we don't lose any quality. We don't lose any of our productivity too as well.
Great. So it's really about understanding your daily active user base, understanding when they're the most active in the game, and correlating that with the events that are going on. Great.
Much better said than I did.
just trying to be, give that key takeaway to our audience. So if people are taking notes, I can kind of summarize. So what's your customer mission at GREE? What do you want to do? What's working right now? What are you looking to scale? Just maybe a little bit of a sneak peek into kind of what's going on in your mind and how you're thinking about growing your organization.
So one of the things is, so I had mentioned a little bit earlier, we are in a highly productive environment. And I think when we look across kind of the mobile gaming space, a lot of companies actually see that it's a high volume experience. I think the theme that we are looking at, and I think a lot of companies also are looking at, is how do you improve the overall user experience through our support interactions? So we start to measure things like quality, and when we say we measure customer satisfaction, most companies do.
How do you do that?
So in our process, I'll go actually pretty granular.
Our audience likes granularity.
We once we receive a ticket, we solve out that ticket, and then soon after that ticket's solved, we send them a survey. In that survey, actually, we have a 5 to 10% participation rate for the number of tickets that we actually get.
Can I ask how many questions are in that survey? I know that people really want to know the answers here because you guys are getting it right. So I always say like 3 to 5 questions. Is it more?
It's actually 5.
Okay, 5.
And we actually, so even with a 5 10% participation rate, it's actually pretty rich.
Okay.
And so because we're in the gaming space, gamers have a really strong opinion.
We know that.
And they even leave us a lot of colorful language too.
Okay.
So we can synthesize that information. I mean, there are open field text. There's a lot of information that we get out of there. Now, obviously that's not quantifiable, but so the other questions are very much measurable. And so yes, to answer your question, it's about 5 questions. Okay.
And great responses. So definitely some good insight there. Think about gathering feedback through surveys.
Yeah, and and there's a lot of like buzz around things like Net Promoter Score. You really want to measure your quality and your customer satisfaction in kind of 3 different ways.
Okay.
There's Net Promoter Score, which is how your users or your customers perceive your brand and your product. Right? Okay. So that's overall kind of loyalty. And then there's the customer satisfaction score. So you ask your players or customers, how satisfied are you with the recent experience that you had? So it's really based on an event, right? So something happened, we resolved it. And then you can actually get a little bit more granular. So if someone actually said, I wasn't satisfied.
How do you kind of take that negative feedback, which can turn into a positive result? So how do you kind of do that?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways so there's 2 things that we do. So we also ask, would you agree with the statement that it was very effortless to actually get my issue resolved? And so, likely, yes, I strongly agree, or I don't agree with the statement, right? Because maybe you answer the question, but after 20 interactions, right? Or maybe after 3 days. So the effort on the customer's part was very challenging. And then we also asked the question of, so we're talking about quality. And a while back, so we started making sure that we were measuring our customer support satisfaction. And then we started saying, okay, well, they're not satisfied. So what do you do with that information, right? We weren't sure. We had a bunch of hypotheses of what we needed to improve. So we broke that down even further. We said, we gave 5 different categories as to like why they're not satisfied. And some of them were clear leaders of things that we needed to improve. And we focused on those areas to actually improve.
Great. So that kind of leads me into the next question, right? This is such a large industry that you're in. So how do you guys continue to stay unique, right? How do you continue to deliver an experience that is unique for your niche of players? And honestly, how do you stay innovative with everything else kind of going on?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's one of our missions here. It's our mission to actually be, we're focused on innovation and service excellence, right? So those are kind of the innovation side of it comes from working with our product team and our engineering teams. And then we're very committed to actually delivering service excellence. One way that we differentiate as an organization, as a support organization, is that we actually, like I said a little bit earlier, we work very closely with our engineering team, our data services team, and our product teams to actually make sure that we're actually providing something that's different than the other other companies. And when I'm talking operationally, I'm talking about boring stuff, not the sexy stuff.
I wouldn't say it's boring. I would say it's a very important part of the health of an organization.
Right. Well, but like things like, let's just say, and it's very important for your support organization to be aligned with your business objectives.
Yes.
Right. So if you're focused highly on revenue, then you should actually be, as a support organization, you should be looking at how your work actually impacts revenue. Right? Same thing with user growth. Same thing with maybe it's session times, right? You should be measuring yourself against the same metrics that the business uses.
Measure your same. Got it.
So, let's say, for example, you're having in one of your products, maybe you're having an issue with retention, right? And the company measures that retention. You, as a support organization, should have that information readily available to you. So that right when your agents or your support people actually interact one-on-one with a user, that you should know whether or not what the retention score is of that person, right? And so
bring that 360-degree view of your customer.
Exactly. So make sure that you have that information readily available to you. So the way we differentiate that one, we actually align with those goals, and we work very closely with our product and data services team to actually make that happen.
Great insight there. So you mentioned it, and I'm going to have to ask, and feel free to share as much information as you want.
Okay.
How is your team measured?
So I don't think there's any. So the measurement itself is not the secret sauce.
Okay. What's the secret sauce? That's what I want to know.
So the things like you'll hear people measuring all the time is first response time. Tickets per agent, your CSAT score, which is meaningful, your quality score, which is meaningful. Those are all things that you actually that most support organizations will actually measure. But it's the secret sauce is like how much do you focus on quality?
How much do you focus on quality?
How fast do you want to actually go? So 20 is it a 24-hour response time? Is it a 10-minute response time, or is it like a 2 to 3 week response time? Right. That's where you get the secret sauce to actually kind of give your support organization a face. We do strive for better than 24-hour response time. And that will range though. Some customers will get minutes, and then some customers will actually get a little slightly longer than 24 hours.
Is the people that are getting the minutes your VIP players? How do you kind of segment that?
Yeah, I mean, so we have like different segmentations. I mean, so for us, there's so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we want to align with our business objectives. And those business objectives change from products. Sometimes it's aligned with the business. So if it's a product that's in a growth mode, then we focus kind of on the user growth. Right? Is it a new user?
Growth mode, user mode. Okay.
If it's a product that maybe that's more mature, and they're focused on the retention side, then we focus on the retention. We prioritize retention. So
you silo it into buckets depending on the stage.
Depending on the stage and depending on where the priorities are of that product. That ensures that kind of every stakeholder that touches the life cycle of that product is on the same page. So if the product owners say that right now it's important that we focus on retention, then we're ready to focus on retention, right? If they're saying that we need to focus on our high value or revenue, then we focus on that, right? And we have we're able to change fast enough to we set up a pretty strong foundation, a dynamic team to be able to adjust accordingly.
And that touches into, I think, the second key takeaway from this is that you need to have a diverse team to manage the growth and maintain that alignment and that transparency that you just addressed.
Right.
So how do you manage I mean, that's a lot, right? And I don't want to call it noise, but there is a lot of noise that happens within an organization. You're identifying your top issues, you're identifying your top players, you're trying to evaluate the play per session and kind of work it all together. How do you kind of stay streamlined and kind of muddle the noise in between?
So, wow, that's actually, there's a lot in that question.
Again, we don't have 3 hours. We're actually coming up to our half-hour mark, but I just wanted to have you address it a little bit. And again, you can connect with us on Twitter if you want to get into a deeper conversation around this topic.
So, I was trained in Six Sigma, and there's a methodology that there's an acronym. I refer to it as DMAIC, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control.
Can you say it one more time for our audience?
Ask you if you can say it for me. Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control.
Got it.
So to answer your question, it's like, let's focus on the right thing, the individual thing that you actually the things that you want to address that are meaningful to your organization, right? Define what that is, and then begin to measure what that is. So measurement can come in a number of different ways. It could be kind of a subtle, I see 5 issues like this kind of creeping up right now, or it's a full system that actually measures the number of tickets that you actually have coming in, right? And then you actually have a system to actually analyze that and then improve any changes, right? And then after you make those improvements, it's control. So how do you make sure that those changes and improvements that you actually put in place stay and they don't go away?
My marketing mind right now is creating an infographic as we speak, but I think that is a great kind of acronym right there that you just spelled out. And it's something that I know that our team can take away, and that's applicable to really any industry, not just gaming. So thank you for that. So we are coming up to kind of our last couple of minutes here. We've been talking about growth and scaling. How can you really scale without causing friction? I know that you've talked about transparency within the organizations, aligning the goals, making sure everybody's on the same page. Am I missing anything else?
No, use the word. So it's actually probably not fair to say to grow without friction.
Okay.
There's going to be friction. If you actually believe that there's not going to be friction,
then you have a problem.
Exactly. It's either too easy or you're really not growing, right?
Yep.
And what you want really is that growth where you don't plan for it.
Yep.
Right?
Like you guys had on that one day in January.
Exactly.
Yep.
So that's what you want. But you want to make sure that you just set yourself up to actually be that organization that can adjust to that friction. And if I can offer one piece of advice as it relates to that, it really does come down to the people, right? You actually have to have, there's those sayings where it's not about, you want to hire for skill, right? You want to have a minimal level of skill, but you can't, it's hard to actually train on character.
It is hard to train on character, absolutely.
Who want to grow and are motivated to actually help kind of pull together an organization.
Across every business unit, that's going to be a key factor. Yeah.
Right. But so I think it's often overlooked in support, right? So support's one of those roles where they see it as kind of this, you're going to answer tickets, you're going to respond to players. But I think right now we're heading into an era, especially with the mobile space, where that needs to change, where your interactions is going to increase. And you actually really have to take ownership of that experience with your users. So yeah,
I think that's a great takeaway, is that, you're not just a person doing a day-to-day job. You're the face of a company, you're their brand, you're their advocate, right? So you need to be able to build that team that, sees that larger picture. So before we get into really covering the 3 takeaways that we've addressed. We've addressed a lot of takeaways, but there are 3 main things that Chris has come to the table with. But before we get there, we have a question on Twitter. What is the most important foundational element to consider when building an agile support team? Great question.
That is a question. Can you repeat it?
I'm going to just give it to you. There you go.
All right, thank you.
You can read it out loud to our audience.
What is the most important foundational element to consider when building an agile support team? It's gonna sound cheesy and it's gonna sound cliche, but it really does come down to the people. Yeah. And let me give you an example of why it's actually meaningful for people. There was a previous company I worked for a long time ago where the attrition was 100% within a year. And so you're losing a lot of the knowledge, efficiency is impacted.
You're having to train constantly new people.
It's very high. Our attrition at this current company at GREE is phenomenal. Within I think we lost one person voluntarily over the last 2 years.
That speaks a lot to your organization and your management. So congratulations to you guys on that.
So if you want to build like an agile team, hire people who can be agile, right? Who aren't don't hire somebody that's going to just under the kind of description of
do just their day-to-day.
Tickets, right? Hire somebody that actually is agile, who actually shows that they want to grow, who actually is willing to change and can adapt to change. Yeah, who brings innovation to the table and brings creativity and brings new pieces to that puzzle that any company needs to have to grow. It's very important.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. So Chris, thank you so much. This kind of wraps up, our fireside chat and our first webinar in this series around scaling customer support, the value of community. And, we look forward to seeing all of you guys on our next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks with Dots. But before we close, let's just cover those last 3 takeaways, right? What are the 3 keys to scaling an engaged customer support organization?
So set up your organization so that it is agile, right? That it can change because it will change. We talked about community and there's the 2 camps of either go to where your users or customers are at, or build one for them, right? There's a good strong third one.
Know your modern player, your modern customer.
Yeah, which is actually very important because our players, as I said, our customers are actually highly intelligent. They're adapting very fast. They have access to information, and we need to be able to actually meet that standard and be one step ahead of them.
Awesome. Well, I know that I learned a lot today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing everybody on our next webinar. And if you had a colleague or a friend miss this, we will be posting the video to our blog as well as our YouTube channel. And we look forward to seeing everybody at our next event. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.